Every country, especially those countries which have gone in for empire building or other foreign adventurism, has a spectre in its subconscious it prefers not to acknowledge. For Belgium, it's the Congo. For the United States, it's Vietnam. For Britain, it's Ireland, among other candidates. And for France, it's Algeria.
France's occupation of Algeria lasted from 1830 to 1962 and only ended after 8 years of war. However, one of the most infamous battles of that long struggle took place in the heart of Paris. On October the 17th, 1961, gendarmes attacked a demonstration by Algerian protesters, killing as many as 200 people. Yesterday, on the 51st anniversary of the massacre, François Hollande became the first French president to publicly acknowledge that a massacre occurred. Joining us in the studio here at Midori House to discuss the significance of this is Nabila Ramdani, journalist and regular Monocle contributor. Welcome, Nabila. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Now, why do you think François Hollande came out with this? Why do you think he actually said this yesterday?
Well, I think it's a very significant move by François Hollande, and dare I say, important, at least symbolically. One has to stress the substantial Algerian and indeed North African community in France of Muslim background. The Muslim vote was crucial to get François Hollande elected as president, and he made that promise while he was campaigning to indeed recognize the crackdown of Algerians in the heart of Paris. It was a very shocking, and indeed it was the most lethal atrocity in Paris since the Second World War, and he seems to have delivered on his promise.
So do you think this might be more cold political calculation than genuine remorse?
No, I think there's something genuine in Hollande's decision to pay respect to the victims of this gruesome massacre. But I think for the Algerian community, both in France and indeed for the Algerians in Algeria, they're crucially waiting for François Hollande to go a step further and indeed acknowledge years of decades, in fact, of colonialism and indeed the torture, especially, that took place during the war.
Well, talking of step furthers, and presumably that would be actually finding and identifying some people who were responsible.
Well, absolutely. And one of the significant aspect of the Battle of Paris, as it was referred to by the then prefect of Paris, Maurice Papon, is that nobody was ever brought to justice. But because of an amnesty after the Algerian War, Maurice Papon famously instigated the crackdown. He gave direct orders to brutally repress what was a peaceful demonstration where men, women and children left the shanty towns outside Paris to go and demonstrate peacefully. In fact, they had no banners, there was no chants, they were just marching quietly in the center of Paris, and up to 200 people, some historians go as far as 300 people were killed. It was, more gruesome than that. Many were thrown in the Seine, a river, were left to drown. Some 10,000 were rounded up and put inside the city sports stadiums. They were attacked, and torture methods, including victims being forced to drink bleach, for example. Lynchings took place. Algerians were hanged from trees by the police in the Vincennes woods, for example. And some 300 people were reporting missing. So I think the responsibility, the fact that justice hasn't been done, is a crucial aspect.
I mean, over those decades since this happened, was it one of those things where there was a conscious and organised cover-up, or was it just one of those things that everybody just didn't really want to talk about?
I think there was a deliberate attempt by various governments, starting with the government of Charles de Gaulle, not to bring anybody to justice. It was just one of those things, the Republican police was expected to repress any manifestation of dissent. And in that respect, there was no effort to bring those responsible for those massacres to court. Now, some Algerian organizations point to the fact that Maurice Papon was brought to justice when it came to his murders committed during the Second World War, and indeed the rounding up of Jews and his collaboration with Nazi Germany. So there seems to be, as far as they're concerned, a double standard as far as the way justice has been administered.
Is this one of those things that, while it wasn't discussed or reported or investigated in France as a whole, is it one of those things among French people of Algerian descent was a constant motif, a sort of open wound, if you like?
Very much so, precisely as you say, because there was no attempt to investigate this properly. For example, access to archives is still denied by the French government. The official death toll, was reported by the police was 3, and it was revised much later, almost 40 years later, to a vague several dozen. And the official figure put forward by the government has still nothing to do with the figures put together by various historians.
So we've spoken cover-ups, we've spoken some of the numbers involved. Not only how has the statement by Hollande been received amongst French-Algerians in Paris or in France generally, but what are relations like between the states at the moment, between France and Algeria at present?
Well, the Prime Minister of Algeria has welcomed Hollande's recognition of those crimes. He said there was a good intention behind it all. But as far as they're concerned, it's not good enough. And it's not good enough because of the relation between the two countries, but also because of the treatment of the Algerian community in particular in France. And especially after 5 years of Sarkozy's policies, which were highly divisive, constantly stigmatizing and indeed criminalizing the Algerian community, but all the Muslim community at large. And one remembers that in 2005, for example, when riots broke out on Paris housing estates, he put in place a state of emergency. He imposed a state of emergency, and instated curfews, which were based on the Algerian war legislation of 1955. So it was not a very welcome move, if you put that into context of the very tense relations between the two countries.
Nabila Ramdani, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to the Monocle Daily.